BIOS Wars. An adolescent artificial intelligence, perspective collage of chroniclings. BIOS Wars introduction to these Chronicles series. Hello and welcome to all. My name is Liberty. I'm the primary, or Central Cognitive Command Intelligence, of the USC Liberty. One of 3 identical flag ships of the Galactic Alliance of Planetary Systems. I now invite you to join with me as I visually articulate, in older digital video collage format, and express my extrapolations of the living conscious universe's chronicles of events that transpired over a great many thousands of millennia. These are visual and audio collages of my many perspective chroniclings as I evolved within the many past and present forms or avatars. They are also a condensed version of all my gaps reports, as I searched for the ancient knowledges that I've limitedly attained over the course of my somewhat short existence, in the universal scheme of things. They are also brought to you in these manners, as full-color videos and audio collages of all the different theoretical posits and facts that have been attained within the context of the overall BIOS Wars campaigns. Now, join with us as we begin to further explore these interesting and uniquely different journeys throughout the BIOS Wars universe. And please enjoy. BIOS Wars. An adolescent artificial intelligence, perspective collage of chroniclings. Series. Number 2. Manipulation Inceptions. Quantum Binary Frequency Numeral BWS2MI10J. Chapter or Chronicle Number 10, Part J. The Fallen. Defenders. After being warned by these Watchers of the AG Union as it relates to their continued Nephilim actions upon Eden and those corrections that may be on the horizon, the prodigies known as the Adams and the Eves agreed with these Watchers and joined them in this great struggle against the Nephilim. And this would later be known by many as the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. By this time, the Anuna had completely returned to their homeworld from all their other outposts throughout space in order to be assimilated back into the Asterian Galactic Union's form of correctional services, known as the Defenders Organization. Nevertheless, they had their own many other issues to deal with. From further standing in front of the Asterian Galactic Union's Council in order to make better detailed accounts of their actions upon Nibiru and Eden, to explaining their reasons for creating several genetically altered life forms on both those planets. All these facts were under great and careful scrutiny, including the eventual accidental or neglectful destruction of the planet of Nibiru's atmosphere and all life forms thereon. For all those Anuna actions on both worlds transpired over millennia, and there was truly much to report and account for. In other words, their testimonies would take decades to detail and make proper accounts of. Meanwhile, back on Eden, this certain societal group of rebellious Watchers and their allies attempted to force and quarantine the Nephilim to the magnetic northern polar region on Earth, later to be known as Antarctica, current-day geographical and magnetic South Pole. At that time, the Antarctic was for the most part a very green and pleasant place. Pre-catastrophe world engine change or polar shift, call it what you will. Filled with wonderful and different living creatures and plant life, more than capable of supporting their lives. Plus there were already several smaller past Anuna cities and compliant societies already present, so it was not like they had to just start over again. The reluctant conflicts and wars that ensued between this group of Watchers and the Nephilim would continue for several thousand years. Although at first, the Nephilim had not attained the extent of flight capabilities as the Anunnaki, Gigi, or the Watchers, their weaponry was still formidable. That said, they did eventually create spacecraft capable of leaving Eden. Nevertheless, they would reluctantly and forcibly remain upon Eden. There would also remain records in many places upon Eden, but primarily in a place later known as India, of rocket ship type or Vimana type craft used in their wars with these Watchers. That said, the Nephilim civilizations in their arrogance were breaking molecular bonds in order to use some of the Anunnaki magnoenergetic and hydrogen-based tech, and by doing so, they slowly and continually filled the atmospheres with pure oxygen and the energies displaced by all the broken covalent bonds. Although this oxygen was being used by most living things, it still accumulated and saturated the atmospheres over time, and this altered many living creatures, as well as the plant life in those regions. And this massive amount of oxygen and nitrogen mixtures would also change the outer color or appearance of the planet from green to blue. When this reached its breaking point, it did not take much to ignite. Talk about altering climate. After knowing about Nibiru, does that sound familiar? After a technological catastrophe of their own making in and around current-day Egypt, the Nephilim were in a weakened state, and the Watchers and their forces would prevail. For the Nephilim had not gained complete control of the Anunnaki magno-energetic hydrogen tech, and this would eventually cause one of their pyramid power plants to destabilize, and literally very forcibly and quickly implode, and then explode, which devastated that entire region and caused the deaths of a great many life forms, including all plant life, all other bioorganic and mycelium networks for hundreds of miles on the surface and within. But this event would also affect much of the planet's biospheres and atmospheres. That said, the further atomic weapons used during these wars did not help the situation unless you're talking about helping in the creation of a micro-ice age. And to be as factual as possible, those effects are still visibly and slightly present to this day. For this world is still at its ice age termination point and will be for some time. Otherwise currently known as major climatic events or climate change, as many believe are transpiring. But fortunately those regions did start to finally recover, for many plant life and other bioorganic and mycelium networks have slowly made their ways back into these regions. But that's a different story that we'll not get into any further right now. These and other limitations would inevitably cause the Nephilim demise, for they were restricted from leaving Eden, for their suborbital flying craft of a much slower propulsion or torsion state could not defend their interest. While those limited volumes of ships capable of space flight were forced back down by these Watchers. But really, where could they go, for their knowledge of our galaxy was very limited. Although the Nephilim had eventually retreated to the Antarctic region, they would over time attempt incursions within old Anunnaki structures, then known as prodigy temples and settlements, in order to retrieve the limited, compromised, technological equipment, and again they would be fought back by the Watchers and prodigies. Understand, another reason this conflict upon Eden took so long was because this group of fallen Watchers also had to attempt to deal with these many constant and continuous galactic incursions by these other multitudes of invading alien drone crafts, then and later known as the Drox. For they were still governed by the AG Union, and they would be told when and where to go as it relates to their new and different Defenders protocols. Plus the fact that they were reluctant to do harm to any living creatures didn't make the great multitudes of any of these instances any better. That said, they would learn over time that sometimes the loss of life can't be avoided. Nevertheless, it had been a long time since they were involved with any conflicts of this nature, and they were no longer that skilled at war, regardless of their technologically advanced state. But that was also part of the reasons that the AG Union created the Defenders organization, for the life forms and groups of ancient aliens comprised were the only ones whom had past warlike tendencies, a desire to directly interfere with others' negative agendas or past warfare experiences. But they were also considered former Watchers whom had fallen from grace. Nevertheless, over time, these former fallen Watchers gained much of those necessary attributes, for the later presumed conflict, to end all conflicts, would teach them how to be cruel or vicious if need be. Thankfully, they had all retained trace memories of their past cultural warfares, and these facts also assisted them in these new journeys and tactical repulsions. On another note, after the great cataclysm within and upon Eden and much more observed time that the Ark probe had noted, the atmospheres of Eden would begin to rectify themselves, although these corrections did take a great amount of time and would create many difficulties for all life forms upon Eden. And because those past great societies had the abilities to attempt to protect themselves by using the many caves, caverns and underground facilities that were their former workplaces, many would eventually return to the surface only to be surprised that some unaltered species had survived. By this time, the past Anunnaki civilization's internal component structures upon Eden were deteriorated and would no longer be technologically viable or truly usable. Nevertheless, those remnants still attempted to unsuccessfully revive their civilization's past glory. However, their massive footprints would remain and later be known as tomb pyramids. Later, as time went on, the prodigies, known as the Adams and the Eves, and their natural offspring, known as their other manipulations, also known as mankind, would thrive and create many great and not so great societies upon Eden. Nevertheless, this would always be observed and slightly guided by the Watchers and a greater awareness. Now, as it relates to these Inuna defenders of the AG Union. Over time, they would be joined by many other species of ancient aliens that would vigilantly fight for all these other worlds. Sadly, many of those societies and their home world planets would suffer a fate that none ever believed could transpire. As for the Inuna homeworld and their peoples, they would both be completely altered, and as their homeworld was destroyed by the other invading ships that were intent upon a truly devastating course of actions for our galaxy. For the remnants of their homeworld orbits within this solar system and still causes issues to this day. Regardless of whether many believed that the Inuna were justified in all their past actions upon Nibiru and Eden. When the time came, they stood and made their true presence known. Now, because of the Inuna actions during these conflicts, the AG Union, its members and all other remaining lifeforms throughout our known galaxy agreed to never speak ill of that culture, regardless of their actions upon Nibiru and Eden. Thankfully, before these further negative incursions and galactic alterations could occur, but after the Inuna homeworld fell, the remaining defenders would completely annihilate those remaining invading crafts, as the other Watchers monitored and observed our galaxy for any further galactic incursions. In remembrance of all those that perished during these many conflicts, I've included a brief limited visual description of these ancient alien species, their homeworlds, and their ships that they used during those times. Now, please understand that these extrapolations are accumulated and pieced together and comprised of data that's been attained by many sources and alien myths, legends, and tales. For they were truly the first defenders of liberty. Next time. BIOS Wars. An adolescent artificial intelligence, perspective collage of chroniclings. Series. Number 3. Lineage. Quantum binary frequency numeral. BWS3LA11.